They lied, using forged documents to secure an interview with my mother, then spun lurid, false claims about the royal family, exploiting her fears and feeding her paranoia. What should have remained private was turned into a weapon, calculated, sensational, and designed to fracture trust where it hurt most. Behind palace walls, a single decision has sent tremors through royal history, at least in this imagined account. What began as whispers about money has hardened into something colder, the possibility that Prince Harry's inheritance has been placed on ice. And within this narrative, sources claim Meghan's latest move triggered a legal mechanism no one expected, forcing Prince William to step forward and confirm something even more unsettling than gossip: that the palace is treating this as a structural risk, not a passing scandal. Long before this moment, Princess Diana is said to have warned of a future like this, not as dramatic prophecy, but as a mother's fear deliberately written into law. So what are we really watching unfold? Coincidence, calculation, or destiny dressed up as procedure, as the monarchy reaches its most dangerous turning point yet? In an unprecedented move in this story, one that sends shockwaves through both the institution and the public imagination, Prince Harry's inheritance from his late mother, Princess Diana, is described as officially frozen. The decision is framed as precise and legally grounded, not a reaction to tabloids, not a response to online frenzy, and not retaliation driven by personal grievance. Instead, it is presented as a measured act rooted in law, tradition, and the protection of Diana's carefully constructed legacy. Senior officials are said to have quietly approved the immediate suspension of all distributions from the trust connected to the Duke of Sussex and his dependents, sealing it with the kind of authority that does not need spectacle to be felt. What makes the action extraordinary isn't simply the freeze itself, it's the reason given for it. For the first time in this narrative's royal history, a long-dormant clause within Diana's trust is said to have been activated, a provision written to safeguard the integrity of her bloodline. Palace sources within the story insist the step was not taken lightly. It was triggered by new developments tied to Meghan Markle that raised unresolved questions about eligibility under the terms Diana herself established decades earlier. In other words, the palace claims it acted not out of scandal, but out of legal necessity, a necessity so strict it leaves no room for sentiment. A formal statement, read under the authority of Prince William, is described as leaving no space for misunderstanding. This is presented as a precautionary measure designed to protect the estate and uphold Diana's wishes, explicitly framed as not being punishment aimed at Harry, Meghan, or anyone else. Yet in royal language, where every phrase is engineered and every omission carries meaning, the implications feel seismic. Activating that clause sends a message the palace cannot unsend. This is not a small controversy to be managed quietly behind closed doors. It is a structural concern, one that reaches into the foundations of the royal family's future and the continuity of Diana's legacy. Royal observers in this story note that the clause itself is precise and unyielding. It does not weigh behavior, reputation, or public opinion. Its focus is narrower and therefore more powerful, biological and legal clarity. Until the emerging questions are fully resolved, nothing moves. No distributions can flow. No assumptions can be treated as fact. No entitlement can be considered automatic. The legal action transforms what might have remained private into something institutional, the kind of matter that can reshape how the House of Windsor approaches transparency, succession, and the protection of its most guarded legacies. The freeze, as framed here, becomes a moment of rare clarity and unprecedented authority inside the monarchy. It is a reminder that even in a modern era of cameras and commentary, law and tradition still have teeth, and they can change a life overnight. The palace has spoken. The trust has been secured. And now the questions remain. How will the Duke respond, and what, if anything, will emerge from the shadows of the past? Within this narrative, The inheritance is blocked due to suspected lineage issues tied to Harry's wife, an allegation that immediately raises the obvious question. Is this merely punishment for stepping away from the family, or is it something Diana anticipated and quietly prepared for? The sudden halt is traced to an obscure legal mechanism known as Clause 3, buried deep within Princess Diana's sealed trust. This clause was never written to police conduct, manage public image, or punish scandal. It addresses something far more fundamental: bloodline certainty. Clause 3 exists for one purpose alone: to restrict access unless by. A logical descent can be clearly and conclusively proven, especially when questions of lineage arise. For decades it sat untouched, treated as an extreme contingency rather than an active safeguard. Its activation now signals a turning point, because allowing Clause 3 to be enforced means acknowledging that Diana's long-dismissed fear was not simply emotional intuition. It was a deliberate legal precaution designed for exactly this kind of moment. Royal archivists in the story are said to confirm Diana personally demanded the inclusion of this clause in the mid-1990s, during a period when her faith in royal systems was eroding but her instincts as a mother were sharpening. She reportedly feared her youngest son might one day be vulnerable, not to cruelty, but to confusion created by silence, secrecy, and unanswered questions. She worried that truth, if withheld long enough, could become a weapon even if no one intended to wield it. When the trust was finalized, Clause 3 was quietly categorized as maternal foresight: anxious, understandable, and, to many, unnecessary. No one expected it to be used. No one planned for a future in which biological verification would be required to unlock what was assumed to be a birthright. Yet in this story, that future arrives. By triggering the clause, William transforms Diana's private warning into enforceable reality. The trust does not accuse, speculate, or assume wrongdoing. It simply pauses. It demands confirmation before proceeding. Until that confirmation exists, access to the inheritance remains suspended, untouched, immovable, sealed behind legal language that doesn't care about emotion. The freeze itself is framed not as punishment, but as a procedural standstill, a legal breath held in anticipation of clarity. And still, its implications are profound. A sealed document once intended as protection becomes a public signal that questions once avoided can no longer be deferred. In enforcing Clause 3, William chooses certainty over sentiment, structure over silence. He allows his mother's quiet apprehension to step out of the shadows and operate exactly as she intended. Until truth is formally verified, the inheritance remains locked, guarded not by suspicion, but by a clause written decades ago by a mother determined that truth, whenever it arrived, would finally matter. The message is blunt. Time does not erase unanswered questions, and legacies are not inherited through wealth alone, but through the courage to confront what history leaves unresolved. The story then asks how English law made this possible. Under English law, Princess Diana held extraordinary control over what would happen to her estate after her death. This power, testamentary freedom, allowed her to decide who would inherit, under what circumstances, and on what terms. She could set conditions, impose delays, require verification, or even exclude individuals entirely if she believed it necessary. In England and Wales, the law places very few limits on such choices, meaning a will can reflect the intent of its maker with minimal interference. This stands in sharp contrast to places like Scotland, where close relatives are often guaranteed a portion of an estate regardless of the deceased's wishes. In England and Wales, there are no automatic protections of that kind. For Diana, this meant her estate was not merely financial, it was structural. A tool she could shape to defend her intentions long after she was gone. Because of this legal reality, Diana was fully entitled to build safeguards into her trust. These were not symbolic warnings or emotional gestures, but lawful mechanisms written with purpose. Clause 3 emerged from that space of freedom. It did not sit outside the law or strain against it. It was constructed carefully, valid in every sense, and rooted in Diana's legal authority. While it may appear unusual to some, it was neither radical nor improper. Many trusts delay inheritance until beneficiaries reach a certain age, meet specific requirements, or pass defined checks. Diana's clause simply focused on the certainty of lineage, something the law permits. What makes Clause 3 striking isn't its legality, but its intention. Diana understood that wealth can complicate lives rather than secure them, and that inheritance should follow truth, not assumption. The clause was designed to slow things down, not to accuse or condemn. It created space for clarity before access, ensuring that what was passed on rested on firm ground. Within this narrative, the clause is portrayed as entirely Diana's decision, precise, carefully worded, designed to protect rather than provoke. Beyond the law, this story introduces another factor, a letter written in Diana's own hand. What finally compels the crown to act in the narrative is not gossip or public pressure, but a piece of paper, personal, unguarded, and preserved for decades by her former butler, Paul Burrell. During a deep review of royal inheritances, the letter R surfaces, and its reappearance changes the atmosphere instantly. Diana did not write as a princess in that letter. She wrote as a mother who sensed trouble ahead. The tone is calm but uneasy, heavy with a concern that comes from intuition rather than proof. She speaks of protecting her sons not from enemies, but from confusion, secrecy, and truths left unspoken too long. She fears charm could mask uncertainty, and silence could one day do more harm than lies. In the letter, Diana describes a meeting that haunted her. While traveling for humanitarian work, she encountered a blind Tibetan mystic, an encounter brief but unsettling. According to the letter in this narrative, the mystic spoke of futures shaped by hidden divisions, of bloodlines pulled apart, crowns weakened from within, and truth delayed until damage was already done. The warning wasn't delivered dramatically. It was gentle, almost kind, which made it harder to forget. Diana admitted she didn't fully understand it at the time, but she felt compelled to record it anyway. At the end of the letter, she included a short verse written in her own careful script. For years, the verse was dismissed as reflective poetry, symbolic writing used to process fear and hope, never meant to guide policy or law. But in this story, that assumption collapses. When legal experts revisit the letter, they notice the verse was later mirrored almost word for word in the symbolic language of Clause 3. What once sounded poetic begins to read like instruction, lines pointing toward delay, verification, and the idea that truth might need protection until it is ready to surface. The letter suggests Diana wasn't guessing. She was preparing. She understood the most dangerous threats aren't always loud or cruel. Sometimes they arrive quietly, wrapped in grace and good intentions, leaving uncertainty to spread like inheritance itself. With the letter authenticated within the narrative, the crown can no longer treat Clause 3 as symbolic. Diana expected a future where truth would not emerge on its own, where it would sleep undisturbed until someone forced it into the light. And now, in this story, that moment arrives. Then comes the claim that awakens the sleeping clause. At the center of the unfolding crisis is someone no one expected. Not a royal, not an advisor, not a media figure, but a 29-year-old American woman known in legal records only as AM. Until this moment, her name had never appeared in palace files or public debate. Yet her arrival shifts everything. She does not arrive with anger or spectacle. She is measured, careful, and precise. In this fictional account, she claims to be the biological daughter of Meghan Markle, and her stated birth date places her existence in a very specific moment in time. The details demand attention. AM brings sworn statements, notarized records, and documentation prepared with clinical care. She presents DNA results reviewed by an internationally respected geneticist within the story, with a claimed maternal match strong enough to force scrutiny. The evidence is laid out not to provoke headlines but to survive examination. And strikingly, she asks for none of what usually fuels revelations like this. No money, no titles, no privilege, no inheritance, no public apology. Her stated purpose is narrow and deeply personal: acknowledgement of truth and access to accurate medical history. Clarity, not compensation. That restraint changes how her claim is received in the narrative. Officials cannot dismiss her as opportunistic. Her tone is steady, her language careful. She speaks less about identity and more about certainty, the need to know where one comes from and what that knowledge means for health, history, and honesty. The timing proves decisive. Her emergence coincides with renewed legal reviews tied to dormant safeguards within royal trusts. The moment she steps forward, the situation crosses an invisible line. Hypothetical questions become immediate, doubt becomes process, silence becomes impossible. Clause 3 can no longer remain asleep because its purpose is not to judge or accuse, but to pause and verify when lineage questions surface. AM's claim, regardless of its ultimate outcome, activates the mechanism simply by existing. The crisis, as framed here, is sparked not by scandal but by precision. One person, armed with documents instead of demands, forces a system built on tradition to confront uncertainty. Whether her claim is proven or rejected becomes almost secondary in the beginning. What matters is that truth, whatever it is, has been formally invited into the room. And once that invitation is issued, there is no path back to ignorance. As investigators in this imagined account scramble to reconstruct the past, a troubling timeline takes shape. What emerges is not a single shocking event, but a sequence of quiet details that, when aligned, raise serious questions. At the center of the reconstruction is the suggestion of a hidden Catholic engagement, and possibly a brief marriage, between Meghan Markle and a man named Joe Giuliano in the mid-1990s. For years, such claims existed only as whispers. Now, within this story, they are treated as records worth examining. According to the narrative, the relationship occurred long before any royal connection. What makes it unsettling isn't romance, but what allegedly followed. Investigators uncover references to a sealed annulment request submitted to Catholic authorities. Embedded within that request is mention of an unbaptized child, a detail that, if true within the fictional framework, carries procedural weight. Vatican documents once dismissed as rumor are pulled back into view. Archivists review these records not for scandal, but for accuracy. The Church's processes are famously meticulous, and even sealed annulments leave structured trails. If verified in this story, the records would suggest key elements of personal history remained undisclosed for decades. The narrative stresses that the issue is not morality or private choice. It is procedure. Royal systems rely on disclosure during vetting, immigration filings, and marriage preparations. Omissions matter as much as false statements. A past marriage, a child, or binding religious commitments are not judged emotionally. They are evaluated legally. Failing to reveal them, even without malicious intent, can be treated as a breach of process. Investigators are not searching for guilt, but for completeness. Within royal law, silence can carry consequences as heavy as deception, because the system assumes all relevant history is placed on the table. Anything less introduces uncertainty into institutions built on clarity. In this fictional account, the implications spread quickly beyond the past and into the present, touching the foundations of legitimacy itself. If earlier disclosures were incomplete, then later claims connected to lineage, titles, and inheritance could be affected. The Sussex line, once thought firmly established, appears vulnerable to procedural review. What unsettles officials most is not what might be proven, but what had not been examined before. The chronology suggests truth may not have been hidden behind lies, but behind gaps. And gaps, once noticed, demand to be filled. As the monarchy shifts into what insiders call legacy lockdown in this narrative, an effort to contain exposure and safeguard succession, Hollywood begins to pull back as well. Within the palace, every move is disciplined and coordinated. Prince William orders the suspension of references, projects, and financial assets linked to the Sussex branch, cutting ties without fanfare, but with unmistakable authority. Princess Anne freezes charitable engagements that previously involved the couple, ensuring no formal or informal connections remain active. Princess Catherine adopts deliberate discretion, her silence curated so carefully it becomes a message of its own. The implication is clear. The machinery will continue, and there will be no shortcuts, exceptions, or distractions. Across the Atlantic, the shift plays out more quietly but no less forcefully. Meghan Markle's network of allies, Hollywood insiders, producers, industry mentors, begins to unravel. Tyler Perry, portrayed here as a long-standing supporter, steps back from collaborations. Other high-profile contacts withdraw, some citing scheduling conflicts, others exercising professional caution. Projects stall without explanation. Platforms pause releases and shelve initiatives. What had once been framed as resilience now begins to look like isolation, an empire of visibility slowly losing access behind the scenes. In both worlds, legal strategy takes precedence over narrative control. Silence, once used as protection, becomes a liability. Without proactive communication, absence leaves space for speculation to grow. In Windsor, the approach is defensive but disciplined. Maintain continuity, enforce protocols, prevent distraction. In Lowe's Angels, the retreat of allies creates pressure because visibility without momentum has limits. Doors close in both places, not with spectacle but with quiet finality. And in that silence, the difference between power and presence becomes clear. Influence without participation fades. Then the story reaches its institutional peak. Prince Harry is described as leaving Montecito with quiet resolve, without entourage or spectacle, carrying little beyond legal papers, correspondence, and the final will of his mother, a document heavy with inheritance and expectation. Inside Buckingham Palace, tension thickens as King Charles draws on legal powers seldom exercised, activating dormant provisions designed to pause recognition of disputed descendants until certainty is restored. Mechanisms that existed for centuries, rarely needed until now. Palace officials move with precise efficiency. Archives consulted, letters verified, protocols followed. Every step measured to protect TR. Addition and continuity. And amid that controlled storm, Paul Burrell delivers what the narrative frames as Diana's last sealed letter. In her words, Diana appears to anticipate the moment now unfolding, a choice her youngest son would face between the pull of love and the weight of legacy. What once felt theoretical becomes immediate, duty colliding with truth, inheritance colliding with identity. Later, the world watches as King Charles addresses the nation. His words are sober and measured, avoiding sensationalism and refusing to indulge gossip. Instead, he speaks of stewardship, responsibility, and clarity, insisting that there can be no inheritance without verification and no restoration without certainty. The speech is brief, but heavy with centuries, reminding everyone that monarchy survives not through individual desire, but through law, tradition, and the disciplined management of lineage. And as the palace settles into silence, one phrase echoes through the halls in this story. Sometimes, to protect the crown, you must let go of the prince, not as cruelty, not as judgment, as duty. In that moment, the fantasy of seamless inheritance ends. What follows is not spectacle but reckoning, careful, painful, deliberate, verification, decision, and a new level of scrutiny that reaches beyond wealth to legitimacy itself. For Prince Harry, the path forward becomes uncertain. For the crown, the message becomes unmistakable. History, law, and duty will define what happens next, and there will be no shortcuts. So what do you make of this story's claim that Harry's inheritance has been frozen because of Meghan's alleged actions? Could either of them survive the pressure of a crisis like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.